a little bit more information from it, but there maybe some of the incentives can be maintained, whether that's expedited permitting alone or others as well.
Yeah, or whether it should be a 100% offset for all electric buildings, or maybe should there be some value versus 100% offset, or other incentives. If you guys can think of other potential incentives along the way, I'd sure be open to that too.
Okay.
So our final question is a general one. Does council support staff's recommendation to move forward with this adoption of the 2021 I-codes with the amendments that we've highlighted this afternoon?
Yep. Rachel, comment?
Yeah, I'm very supportive. One thing I'd love to take a look at with the codes next year, which is unrelated to our energy goals, is snow loading and weight of roof structures. I know that had come forward as a major concern from when the county re-upped its code last time, seeing some 6-foot at one time events in Crested Butte and Steamboat. There were questions about, were we requiring enough roof strength? And with climate change, weird circumstances, we all want to be prepared for that. But the second thing would be, if it's possible and not too much work, how closely aligned will our codes be with the county codes then? I know we're always a little out of step because of when we adopt, but it'd be useful to know, are we just catching up with them? Are we getting a little ahead of them? You know, so many homes and builders operate right on the border line between our municipality and county lines, and just to know what level of concurrence there is would be helpful.
On that last question, we have a lot of work to do between now and the end of November in terms of developing ordinances and conducting outreach that I think is commensurate with council and the community's expectation. Are there other members of council who want us to do the county level analysis? Because that's something we weren't planning on doing.
Well, I was hoping it wouldn't be a real in-depth thing, maybe just talking to their county official or looking at their codes. Or have they adopted anything that we should be looking at adopting that isn't in our hands right now?
We're familiar enough to give a general update.
Yeah, I'm just asking for something general, not in-depth, if possible.
Yeah, I don't want to send you off on a big project to compare the two. I think for new building construction, our codes are really very good, and the additions and electrification I commend you on the direction we're going.
These codes are updated every 3 years, but we adopt every 6.
But it sounds like we're going to get more frequent.
That's what we've done historically, because it is a big staff time load to prepare these kinds of code adoptions. It's also an adjustment for the community to get used to a new code. So in the past, we've done the 6-year cycle, but we definitely see value, particularly on the energy code, to look for more frequent updates moving forward.
Is the county currently on 2018 or 2015 or?
They're also preparing for the 2021.
2021. Thanks. The answer is yes here.
Yes.
And yes.
And any additional questions or recommendations prior to first reading?
I think you heard a couple of them.
I was going to chip in at the beginning, but at the end, Bonnie and Nick and I have worked for Stephen combined 52 years. Stephen was an innovator in the energy code of development. Our building stock since '95 is about the most energy efficient building inventory you'll find on the Western Slope or anywhere probably in America. And I just had to throw one Carolinaism there. If Stephen was here, he'd say writing code is like picking beans. You think you got it all picked, and then you move a little bit and you see some more beans. And I think from the questions you guys gave us and the direction we got, we are continuing to pick the beans, and we're going to come back with a whole bushel basket full of good answers for your good questions.
Thank you, Dennis. That's perfect.
Has Stephen retired?
Yeah, he's on his second go around.
CP called it rewired, and we're having a rewired party at the Elks Lodge on October 19th at 5 o'clock, if you're welcome
right.
to come.
I saw
It's not a surprise anymore.
him twice this weekend, and I can say that that is indistinguishable from the real voice. It's very well done.
And he wasn't in the room when we started, so I'll say it now. I just want to highlight the fact that Ben Anderson was recently promoted to Deputy Community Development Director, which is a huge value add. Yep. It's a big value add for our department and for the organization. We also think for the community, be they members of the development community or citizens at large. Ben's a huge member of our team, huge contributor, and somebody I'm really proud to work with. So I wanted to embarrass him a little bit. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, Council.
Blushing.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a couple minutes. How about just a 5-minute recess, Amy, while we get switched over to another? This is the updated Galena and Cooper. What's going on? I just wanted to
Cool. All I gotta do is I'm back. You got my email? Did you get my email?
No.
If you need to see it, I'll say it, but I sent you. I went and looked at it.
Okay. Thank you. We are back. We just took a quick break between topics, and we're on to our next one. This is a Lumberyard affordable housing update. Good afternoon. Chris, are you introducing?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Last we talked about my name's Chris Everson, Affordable Housing Development Project Manager, City of Aspen. Last we talked about the Lumberyard Affordable Housing Project. You reviewed the 100% schematic design with 277 units and 467 bedrooms, with about half of the parking underground, half of the parking on the surface. As a reminder about today's work session, you still have your developer hat on. This is not a regulatory review, but this is a significant milestone for the project in that today's presentation is mirroring back to you the project that you essentially asked all these folks to design to help fulfill the critical need in the community for affordable housing, but only this time through the lens of how the project fits into the municipal code, both in terms of its technical contents and the formal land use and review process. Today you'll hear from Randy Rhodes, who you know. He is Director of Affordable Housing with Cushing Terrell, your architect. He is also an architect proven by the fact that in Randy's bag right now, there are 2, not 1, architect scales.
Wow.
Physical, old,
Present
not a
them.
virtual scale,
Prove it.
like the old kind that, wow. You're going to hear from
Between the new and the old kind.
Laura Doherty, project manager and architect with Cushing Terrell. New member of the team, Nicole Olmstead is our planner for the Lumberyard development application and the process. Giles Thornley with landscape architect and principal with Connect One Design. Richard Goulding, principal with Roaring Fork Engineering. And unless you have any questions for me, some of this material you've seen, some of it is, again, through that different lens. So if you want us to slow down or speed up at any point, let us know. We do plan to go fairly quickly because there's a lot of content. Part of the effort here is to sort of rekindle the community conversation because, part of the ask here is to submit the development application. So I want people to understand what the contents of that development application that you're submitting. And Laura's going to sort of start to kick that off on the next slides, and she's going to also talk about what our requests of you are today.
And having a minor panic.
Performance?
I'm in the Zoom, but not a presenter.
Is he a lumberyard? Is he the model?
Laura Doherty, I'm showing up as. Join us. I've been promoted to panelist.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Feeling very excited about that now.
Such a thrill.
I know. And my panic is now eased, so that's very exciting.
Wait, don't tell me.
Nice. Well done. Can't believe I grew up in Chicago and I never went to see one live. It's one of the biggest Chicago regrets I got.
There's still time.
But there's still time, yeah. I really love that show.
I think I was successful with a little help from my friends, so thank you. As you know, I don't usually get the role of presenter in front of you, so I do get that role today. So here we are. Here's our recap. You know where we've been, but we do want to recap some of this. There have been 4 community outreach moments to date. There's been a conceptual design, and we have completed schematic design. That was as recently as May of this year, and we've been at work since then, with the direction at the culmination of our last time in front of you, asking for permission to continue to take the design represented and put it in a application for development. And so that's what we've been doing, and that's where we've been. Those programmatic elements that are include our 11.3 acre site, which has been an accumulation of multiple sites. As we'll get into this, you'll see that we've recently got the subdivision underway for the triangle parcel, so you'll be seeing that soon. We are continuing forward with 277 units, representing 467 bedrooms, housing 590 FTEs. We're meeting parking requirements by code, which is 425 spaces. It continues to be both a combination of rental and for sale units. We're still phasing this project. We'll get into more detail on that. Really pushing that sustainable and resilient design. I was really excited to hear the direction that the building code adoption is taking. Luckily, Dennis has been very forthcoming with that direction, so we've had a glimpse into that future and have been working very much towards those things that we heard about just moments ago. We continue to allow space for a future childcare facility on site. We're continuing to have trail connectivity, bettering the situation than exists today. Continuing to push access to both daylight and the amazing views from this site, public transit, noise mitigation, elevator access to all housing units, really pushing that safe and inviting pedestrian experience. And the challenges are still the same. So we'll talk a little bit more about where we're at on the demographics piece. We'll talk about our schedule and really that balance of competing priorities. So,
We got a question for you.
yeah.
I just have a comment on your programmatic elements. Thank you. I just have a question on the programmatic elements. I don't know that we can truly relate 467 bedrooms to 590 full-time equivalents. That is based on 123 of the bedrooms having 2 people in them. But some of the bedrooms will have children who are not employees at all. And so if you're going out to the public to discuss this, I think it's more important to say approximately or a range of, depending, a lot of the 1-bedrooms will clearly have 2 people in them, but some of the 3-bedrooms might have 1 parent and 2 child. So I would make that an approximate and try to find a different way to word that.
That's going to be on me. I asked them to put that in there.
Okay.
Strictly based on the calculation, based on the FTE standards.
I was gonna ask.
In the APSHA regulations at 1.75 per 1-bedroom, 2.25 per 2-bedroom, and 3.0 per 3-bedroom. So probably should mention that it's the calculated number based on those standards.
Or something like that. And as you know, I've kind of asked that we double check that standard based on how many people ACHA really has through its inventory and requalification process to make sure we're not giving people too much credit for the bedrooms they're using or too little. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're here today, and we're here to summarize the content of the development application. And really, it's taking the schematic design that you've seen before and now looking at it through the lens of regulatory requirements. It's really exciting stuff. Well, sorry, Nicole. But really what we want to do is discuss the application included in the submittal and how that translates to that submittal. We're going to highlight the application content, the talking points, and we're going to introduce the review process and discuss that time frame. Some of what we'll see today, we're going to get through it as quickly as we can. Some of it will seem redundant, but we are following the steps and the order of that application. And so some of the content will be the same. It will be presented through slightly different lenses and requirements. So we will all be presenting different aspects, and ultimately, at the end of this, we'll be asking if what we've presented that will be included in the application meet your expectations for that translation of the schematic design into this development application. And then can we formally submit that application to Community Development Department for review? And then lastly, can we perform the community outreach and community engagement piece related to this application, which will help inform the public hearing process? So we'll get into what that might look like and the timing of that later in this presentation. So at the end, we will come back with those 3 questions for consideration. So the overall timeline of where we're at, we've completed schematic design, and we're here today. We've been working on our development application, and so we're here to present those highlights. We intend to submit that application, if approved to do so, sometime in late October. Looking to have our 5th round of community engagement in early November, highlighting what this development application will look like and get public feedback. Meanwhile, the development application will be going through its completeness review. We'll hope to get those comments and then submit final development application by the end of the year, at which point we'll be going through the rest of those processes and hope to have a planning and zoning public hearing related to this project, and then be back in front of you for a first council reading based on that. We're hopeful that snow will still be flying at this point, hopefully in early spring timeframe, but knowing that these timelines will take the timelines that they require. So that's the general timeline. Chris, what did I forget?
Any questions?
So with that, I will kick it over to you, Chris,
Yeah.
because nobody knows the property history and existing conditions like you do.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, next slide. So at this point, we're starting to get into the format of the development application. And each section that you see is reflective of a section of the application. So the vicinity map, nobody knows the area like you do. You see more towards the right of this map, the assembled Lumberyard property, but also in the context of across Highway 82, you've got the airport. To the upper right, you've got Deer Hill, and further beyond, you've got the Burlingame Affordable Housing in the far upper right corner. To the left of the lime green colored Lumberyard site, you've got the Aspen Airport Business Center with a listing of all of many of the different businesses and services that are available there, as well as the further context of the North 40 and thereabout. But as we go forward, our maps generally show north going to the left and south going to the right, just to help orient you as we move to the next slide. And so, sorry.
Sorry, it's really glitchy.
And so, as Laura mentioned, the property does have essentially 3 pieces that we're putting together. On the left of this map, you've got the Aspen mini storage. In the center, you've got the existing Lumberyard facility. And to the right, you've got the undeveloped property, which is currently being subdivided. And we'll talk about where we are in that process in a moment as we, again, go to the next slide. Again, to the left on this map, 105 Woodward Lane, that happens to be the Aspen mini storage facility that you are the proud owners and operators of right now. The Lumberyard facility, which is, of course, you are the lessee, or I should say the lessor, at the Lumberyard facility. The Lumberyard folks have been served their termination notice, by the way, in alignment with the overall project schedule. And again, the undeveloped property to the south, that triangle property, jump ahead and talk about each one of these pieces a little bit more as the application does ask us to get into this. The current use of the mini storage site, approximately 3 acres, those CMU block frame structures. There are over 200 storage units, 27 commercial parking spaces is what you rent out. Vehicular access is from 200 Road, otherwise known as American Lane in the ABC, and pedestrian access across the site adjacent to Highway 82. The current trail alignment does run adjacent to Highway 82. The next parcel in the center of the map next slide, is the Lumberyard property. There's numerous different structures on that site, many of them built in the 1970s for the lumberyard and building supply operation that is there, the storage of those types of materials. Vehicular access is through the unsignalized access point with Highway 82 adjacent to Mountain Rescue. We've got some plans for that area. And again, in terms of pedestrian access, you do have that trail alignment that runs directly across that driveway right on the surface. So today, you've got cars going in and out of that driveway coming right off the highway, and you've also got people going by on bikes and walking past right across that driveway as well. And then the next site is the undeveloped, little over 3.5 acres that is currently vacant. That was set up as a developable portion of the sort of Deer Hill and Burlingame Ranch property that was purchased from the Pepke Trust years and years ago, has since been subdivided for Annie Mitchell, has also been subdivided for the Burlingame seasonal housing, and is again being subdivided to facilitate the further development of affordable housing in that area. And so the use there is currently vacant. There's currently no vehicular access. I should note that we did recently attend a public hearing with Planning and Zoning for subdividing that triangular-shaped piece of property off of the larger Deer Hill. P&Z approved that unanimously. You'll be seeing that first reading here will be October 25th. Second reading here will be November 15th. So just remember, there's no development associated with that specific application, but big picture, it's of course associated with the overall lumberyard development. Was this me?
No, I think Randy's up.
Okay.
Or did we switch?
No, this was you.
This is me.
We'll keep it with you, Chris.
So at the table here, we've talked a lot about some of the due diligence that's gone on related to the project. There have been some things that have gotten more attention than others. So wanted to point out to you that there's been a lot of due diligence that we haven't spent a lot of time on with you, such as the Phase 1 environmental site assessment, the cultural resource inventory, the geotech study. Obviously, you know about the noise assessment, you know about some of the air testing, you know about the transportation impact analysis. We talked here about the demographic study and the market assessment that EPS did for us. The next item, I'll give it a minute. The airport obstruction evaluation, and then the resilience assessment and opportunities related to that. So some of those things have gotten more attention than others, and we do have some additional detail about this because, again, this is all part of the application. So next slide. So again, we did have the Phase 1 environmental site assessment done. It did not provide any evidence of recognized conditions that would cause the need for a Phase 2 environmental study. So basically, we've got a fairly clean site that doesn't trigger any immediate environmental concerns. The cultural resource inventory was very similar in that That process is looking for historic connections where this development might somehow affect a historic connection. Lots of historic elements throughout town. This area, less so. There really aren't any historic connections that this development would be sort of affecting, right?
Unless we hit mammoth bones when we dig.
Remember when we talked about that for Burlingame, too? Dinosaur bones.
Childcare center becomes museum.
Right. The geotech study shows that the site is suitable for the types of buildings that we want to construct here. Continuing on to the next slide, you've got the highway and airport noise assessments. We're well aware that there are some elevated noise levels related to the highway and the airport. We have measured those. We know that those are within the HUD guidelines. We know our design is currently, we've spent time having our design mitigate for the noise to the extent feasible in numerous different ways. And we also know that we're outside what's called the 65 DNL contour of the airport, which is one of those critical noise thresholds. In terms of air quality, you know, you've seen some information about PM2.5, PM10. You've seen our VOC air sample study that showed that these concentrations are at safe levels. The last time we were here, we promised you we'd be working on a peer review to help put those results in better context. So when we submit the application, that peer review will be included, and that will talk about sort of what those levels mean in a larger context of both here in Aspen and sort of the rest of the world as well. Also, kind of excited about this, in 2 days' time, we're going to be installing new air monitoring sensors at the site that are going to help us do a better job of getting accurate information on particulate matter, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and carbon monoxide. We're going to put in place those monitors, and we'll have the ability to monitor them from now throughout the entire public hearing process. So when we have the actual public hearings, you'll have all that data. By the way, PM, ozone, NO2, SO2, and CO, those also happen to line up with the World Health Organization guidelines. Okay?
What is DNL, 65 DNL?
The 65 DNL stands for,
Decibel.
yeah, it's like the decibel, I'm not going to remember the acronym, but it's basically there's contours around both the existing condition at the airport, but in the airport's 2017 environmental study, there's also contours around the noise contours around the proposed realignments as well. And we're outside the critical 65 DNL in all of those. Now, they could completely change direction, but at this time, the contemplated realignments, because the contemplated realignments to this point are to the west, not to the east. So we're safe of those at this time. Rich is later going to talk about some of the civil and utilities. There's been a lot of utilities work and design work going on sort of behind the scenes, and we've only touched on it at a high level with you folks, but our plans do include upgrades to electric, water, sewer. There's capacity for those. We also have a stormwater management system that's being designed to go above and beyond and actually be more of a good neighbor. And we're actually going to reduce the impacts from the current existing conditions. So the people who are near the Lumberyard development after it's completed, they're going to be better off later than they are today.
Yeah. I want to make a small point back on air quality before, and that is that we should all acknowledge that the airport itself, when they do make the improvements, are going to be eliminating a lot of their emissions as they go. You know, electric chargers to keep the plane's engines warmed up instead of having to turn the engines on while they're waiting to take off and things like that. The newer aircraft that's coming online is more efficient and has less emissions. And we're slowly but steadily seeing cars become more electrified that come up the highway as well. So we should see reductions in our emissions from our changing society. It doesn't deal with PM10, but that's more about street sweeping and other things that we can keep up. But I did want to make that point that we're anticipating a different type of air fleet coming in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
And that's a picture of the air quality sensor that you're going to see pop up on Wednesday in front of the Lumberyard.
Right.
The transportation impact analysis, you're aware that by housing workers closer to Aspen, the project's going to help reduce CO2 emissions by 500 to 600,000 pounds a year. The project does add vehicle trips and travel times on Highway 82 during rush hour will be increased by about 1 minute, but we also know that by improving the transit, we can reduce that. And so we'll talk about some of the proposed transit and other mitigation techniques to reduce that travel time, reduce that number of trips. In terms of transportation demand management, again, we're going to get into this in a deeper level, but this is the section where we describe the due diligence, and so we're looking at transit system improvements and strategies, access to that transit being approved, and also expanding the bike share, in this case, WeCycle, to the site.
Are we talking with RAFTA about how we integrate those routes with their service delivery now in the city contract?
Yeah, we're going to have some more detailed slides about that coming up,
Okay.
quite a ways down.
Sure, no
And
problem.
so we'll get into it, but we're also having staff level meetings still about, in our transportation study, there are numerous different routes that are proposed, and we want to get together and bring to you a staff recommendation of the routes. I mean, you can ultimately trump that staff recommendation, of course, but we're looking at those routes very specifically to make sure that we're recommending the route that makes sense among ourselves, among engineering, transportation staff as well.
Yeah.
So there's a RAFTA component to the city's link to transportation.
Okay, yeah, I was just hoping that we might see some integration with the Burlingame existing route, which for a long time I've thought should service the Airport Business Center as well. But I'd like to know how they will connect or not.
We'll get into that in a moment.
Thank you.
In terms of the due diligence related to the affordability mix, I've replaced this slide from what was in your packet, and I've gone so far as to ask the clerks to replace it in the online packet. The mix that was shown in your packet was us sort of taking the EPS recommendations where sort of in the lower left-hand corner of this page, it's not meant to be actually all these details to be legible. But you probably remember those big blue bars on the screen that Laura's going to run her cursor over those. The Category 2 and Category 3 being the largest areas of job growth that we've been seeing from 2010 on. And so, EPS was recommending a mix that was about 15% Category 1, 33% Category 2, 33% Category 3, some 17 at the Category 4 level, and 6%. One of the things that we're doing related to funding, trying to get outside funding sources, is to what degree can we tweak or move some things around just a little bit that can actually affect the amount of outside funding that we're eligible for, right? And so what I submitted to you in your packet was us doing that too much. And in fact, these other two charts that are shown are more like us sort of reeling that back in, getting closer to the affordability mix that best aligns with these job growth bars. And so, we plan to continue working on that. But one of the goals that we've been trying to accomplish is, how can we provide some amount of flexibility for developers, right? Because we want to attract developers to develop Phase 1, Building 1, Phase 2, Building 2, Phase 3. Building 3, we're going to talk about that phasing plan in here in a minute. But by providing them with some amount of flexibility, are we, which means, varying in small amounts from this, EPS affordability mix, will we be able to, balance like getting a little bit more funding, but not deviating too far from exactly what these, recommended affordability mix is very specifically. So we're working on that right now. When we actually submit the application, it's going to be highly reflective of the affordability mix that was recommended by EPS, but we want to try to right-size some amount of flexibility because phase one, phase two, it's going to be years later, and if you're hiring a private developer to come in and develop, say, phase two of the development, and if they can get some extra amount of outside funding by, say, some 2.5% to 3% variation in the affordability mix, that doesn't completely derail your goals, and it helps you to get some outside funding as well. So if, that's kind of where we are in terms of further developing that from where you saw it last.
Yeah. My first question is, does the unit mix in its entirety have to be set at entitlement? Does it have to say X many threes, X many twos, X many fours at entitlement? Yes or no?
No, but.
No, but, okay.
There's the flexibility that there can be an administrative modification, and then there's, of course, the ability to do, a major modification, which would come back to City Council at a later date. Let's say in 2027, you see something completely different from, City Council sees something completely different than what we've seen in the last 10 years. They might want to make some major modification for something that we don't see right now.
Okay.
Right?
Well, yeah, what I want to get at is, and Skippy knows this well, we're having horrendous troubles filling our low-income units that we have for rent at Truscott now. And they're low-income tax credit units, and the income is so low that nobody can qualify unless it's a single parent with 1 or 2 children. But no married couple with both of them working can. And the other thing, when I've been trying to get what I know are some lower-income workers to qualify for those units, is finding out, well, because they're lower income, they work 2 jobs, and then they don't qualify either because they're putting in 50 and 60 hours a week. And so I'm just really nervous of us developing housing for a workforce that won't qualify. And we've seen the changes really during the pandemic in a dramatic way. When you go through Glenwood Springs, you'll see the Wendy's is advertising starting employees at $19 an hour. So our community our employers are having to go up quite a bit to keep people to even want to commute here. And so I'm just nervous about, are we targeting a low-income workforce that no longer exists? Because everyone's getting paid more than that to come up to town. So I just had to put that out there for our consideration. I want to make sure we're hitting the lower income levels as well, but boom, it's become an issue. And some of those units have been vacant for months and months, despite advertising in Carbondale, in Spanish language newspapers, in other outreach areas. And so we're like, wish we could buy our way out of low income tax credits now because we can't fill those units. One other thing, I know this is really far out there, and it's conceptual at this point. It's nowhere near a thought-out program. But one of the other things that has really come to us, to the APSHA board, about housing is the inability to recruit and bring in new people, because your qualifications to win a unit are always based on your work history here in town. So if you worked here 2 months or 4 months, hey, you might get in that unit just because nobody else applies during that 2-week period it's open. But otherwise, people who recruit talent for specialized jobs can't get access to units for their employees. And so I've kind of thought, is there a way we could create some small percentage of these units that would be available for recruitment of new talent, new specific into the community, and those would be able to be rented at a higher rate, a category 4 or more, on a short-term basis to some employers. So it would be a way to get more money into the pro forma with a limited number of units, and we're building so many rental units that you could always rebalance whatever ratio of that you wanted and make sure there's plenty of units that are going to the general APSHA rental pool of people looking for housing who've always been here. But I wanted to see if there's a way we can solve for another issue that's become very apparent. It used to be that you could recruit someone and maybe they could get by and free market housing for a couple of years until they'd have enough work history to qualify for our rentals, but that just isn't happening anymore. And so I realize this is a circumstance that has really become much more apparent as we've been going through this project and not at the start. But so again, that's why I'm asking, do we have to set all the categories at entitlement, or can we continue to build the type of flexibility that we might need into this to do some more innovative things with how it's rented in the future? That's all.
I mean,
You thinking of an answer?
You're green, you're green.
Well, in the approval process, depending on how you set it, I think Chris was correct in his earlier statement with the, did you say no but or yes but?
He said no, but.
No, but we can always add conditions.
Yeah, it depends on how you set the conditions and whether you want to give that flexibility to the staff, and you set it out clearly in your approvals. However, you do have to be careful that you don't set a situation where you're trying to bind the future councils, or the opposite, which is the no but, is create a situation where you are requiring major amendments to the approval. So we're kind of a long way from that. I think it's a legitimate question that you're asking. I think we're a long way, and we just have to work through the language that may provide that flexibility appropriately.
Okay,
So I would say more of a yes but rather than a no but. It's all,
We'll let you
it's
guys
all
work it out, and
in the
maybe we
future.
can have some smaller meetings in between to talk about it. But, we're not going to be putting more rental units on the market for a very long time. I don't think we'll be putting a lot of rental units on the market for a very long time. And I wouldn't even be suggesting that we consider such a thing if it was just a 20-unit project or something like that. But I think there might be a chance to accommodate some of the additional needs that we know are happening within our community, which is essentially a type of succession planning in every organization. There's almost no organization or no business in town that isn't facing retirements of more specialized positions and trying to recruit. And I think it was the Aspen automotive guy who said, look, I can't bring anybody into work to fix your cars here because they can't get housing here and they can't qualify for APSHA. What are you guys going to do? So I'd love to, and I'd written Scott kind of a rough concept paper about how we might be able to do something like this, but I just wanted to make sure we would have the flexibility going forward if something like that can get fleshed out and become appropriate by 2024.
Chris, do these funding mechanisms, are they based on AMI, percentage of AMI? So
Yeah, nearly all state and federal funding programs are based on percentage of area median income. And in fact, your system is category 1 is 50% AMI and below. And one of the things that we were just talking about the other day is sort of the key differences between some of the Truscott low-income housing tax credit units that are 50% AMI or less versus the low-income housing tax credit units that you put in place at 488 Castle Creek, which is 60% AMI or less. And the importance of that 50 to 60 band actually, I think, might be a big difference maker here because, I don't recall them having any vacant units trying to fill the 2-bedroom, 60% AMI or less units at Castle Creek. And also for us, that 50 to 60% AMI band is category 2. It's not category 1. So one of the things that we've been talking about is trying to make sure that we're being really careful about including that category 2 portion from 50% to up to 60%. And then also one of the things that you've met our financial consultant Tom Curl, he's also finding there's more and more funding that's going to be available for what everyone calls, we've been calling all of our housing workforce housing for years. But there's this sort of nomenclature of the missing middle, which is more like an 85 to 120% AMI that people are now referring to as workforce housing. So because of just the overall bigger problem of affordable housing in our country in general, there's more focus now on finding and creating funding mechanisms above 50% AMI and in fact up to 120. So there may be some of that is available as well. So we may not be quite as locked in as we used to be.
Well, financing certainly could lock you in more. I agree with the issue of, depending on how you are financing this whole program, you could find yourself in a very much no ability to amend that, depending on where all of the money's coming from.
How often are the EMI numbers adjusted?
Annually.
Every year, the Colorado Housing Finance Authority publishes a new AMI scale for every county in the state. In fact, that's done for every county in the country at the HUD level. So every year, those numbers are republished.
Okay, so as our workforce is paid more, the AMI is going to increase, and
They're not as directly correlated as you would think, because AMI is based on everyone's income in the county, whether they're retired, working, or brought all their wealth from Texas. So it's a really tricky number, and I think it's fair to say Housing Board has had challenges with AMI because incomes have been going up. But if you raise the AMI level, then some people no longer qualify for their units that they're in, and they need to be told to move out, and other people who used to qualify no longer qualify. And each time you change those category and income levels, people are getting cut out. And that's why you've heard me ask before, well, what about Bureau of Labor Statistics? What are people really making in the area?
income.
But there's not going to be a real move off of AMI for a lot of reasons. I understand that. But I've heard from all the resort communities that they just don't feel AMI really works for them because it's an average of everybody. And when you think about the home values a lot of people have and their income from investments that they bring into our community, I think it really changes.
So in some ways it works, in some ways it doesn't. For funding and availability of federal funds, it's an AMI. For employment, it doesn't work.
And that's where you need to be careful, and where I think Chris and I are saying the same thing with no but, yes but. You go in one direction, you may limit your financing, but keep your flexibility. You go in another direction, you
Limit your eventual tenants.
yes.
When there's
You limit the other and gain the flexibility.
And as I've been told, the one thing HUD doesn't like is discouraging people to work less so they don't earn too much money. That seems to be the only solution for some of these people. Is like, if I accept the raise, if I move up on the ladder, I'm going to lose my housing. So it's just a dilemma we have to work with on this.
Yeah, you don't want to do that, but you don't want to, again, you can lose your financial flexibility by keeping your control of this, and that may or may not be a positive thing.
That's right.
So, you agree?
I do agree, and we know that we have more work to do on the finance side. There's a direct connection between this and the finance side. We should also continue to work on some of the specifics related to providing perhaps some flexibility in terms of the non-income related qualifications like the work history, which I think we've done before. And so, we need to propose some conditions that could provide some flexibility, but essentially still keep you on a path that doesn't completely derail, fulfilling where most of your job growth is occurring. Is that a fair direction for us to continue with?
First, Skippy?
Yeah, no, I just have a lot going on here. First, Ward had asked me what category the units are that Rachel was talking about, and the answer is they're sort of below the categories. So we're not having the issue with our category ones. It's these special projects that have particular credits that have a limit below that we just can't fill. So, what I would say, and ask you guys, is kind of what I'm hearing is like, I think we want you to have flexibility. Even 2.53% feels very restrictive. But there is sort of the dungeon on one side of that flexibility that we already know isn't going to work. And so, like, let's not explore flexibility into places that we can't house people, but around the rest of it, let's have that flexibility. People can bring us things that we can say no to, but it'd be good to know what we have to say no to. At the end of the day, we sort of need these units tomorrow. We can't fund that. So anything that can get us there sooner, whether it's, employers or larger firms, at least bring it to us, and we can say no if it doesn't hit this mix, but let's avoid the dungeon of this won't work.
Right, because, it's not necessarily us, the city, I should say, that's going to be developing each individual building phase, could be a private developer.
Right.
And so, want to make sure that we all understand that it's going to be somebody else sitting here potentially proposing that to you, right?
Okay. Just on the APSHA website, the Country Inn, senior and low-income priority unit, one person maximum income of $38,700, one person and $44,200 for two people. That's one of the units we're not able to fill. Let me see if I can find the other one. Two-bedroom flat available at Truscott. Monthly rent is $1,095. Maximum income $56,400 for two people, $63,400 for three people. These units have been empty for a very long time because we can't find people who legitimately qualify. And then there's a two-bedroom loft. Read on, the same sort of thing. Two people can have an income of $56,400. Three people can have an income of $63,480. And these units are sitting vacant because we can't find people who qualify. So this is my concern.
Let's not replicate that.
And I don't think those are below category one, Skippy. Those are category one or two incomes.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the number, but I believe.
Yeah, I'm just reading off the website. Those are definitely not below category one. And I'm not even sure if they're where they sit with category two, but it's just a real issue. And it's just really cropped up in the past 18 months. The city market is giving all their workers a $2 or $3 incentive pay just to save this winter over what they normally would make.
I guess, Rachel, what I'm wanting to get out there is agreed. We don't want to replicate that problem or build anything that's not used. Category one is simply the lowest category that we have, and we're already talking about at APSHA raising what category one is. So I don't want to exclude future lower incomes as we adjust that. The problem is that these have a restriction that is set, and so
that's what my point
okay,
is.
just making sure.
Basing on financing on the categories can lead to units we can't fill.
So we restarted this conversation on Friday at length. And so I think I've made, our team very aware of not getting caught, in a situation where we want any vacant units. But we also want to be responsive to the fact that we do have a fair number of low income households that would be better served living at the community they work. So we want to try to right-size that, so it's work in process. We're going to try to continue to take that into consideration and also try to set some flexibility that's going to work for our application, perhaps for future council, and for a private developer who might be proposing that. So we've admittedly got some work still to do on that.
Yeah, I think this is a really good consensus target, and we'll see.
That was the main reason why we were showing this, is just to communicate that we think that this makes sense as a target, and we'll keep working through it, and we'll be presenting further updates to it.
Doesn't work, we'll try a Walmart.
Okay.
It's a Target joke, people.
So in terms of the unit sizes related to the Housing Authority regulations, we are very close to those in size, as you're well aware. The one bedrooms being, slightly below the 700 square feet. The two bedrooms being slightly above the APSHA regulated size, and the three bedrooms there as well. Some of the important elements there are, providing significant amounts of storage, efficient, flexible layouts, available of site amenities, the unit location within the development. We can have different categories in different places based on what they look at and where they are. There are some things that are either NA in the regulations or that we're sort of balanced with. Like when it comes to above average natural light, we're right-sizing the amount of natural light, right, especially with the windows that are facing to the west, because we don't want to overheat the units, create a situation where all of a sudden we're cooling all of the units, because we just talked about all those heat pumps. We're adding 277 mini-split heat pumps on the roof, and we don't want all those heat pumps cooling because of the fact that we've provided too much natural light facing the west in the months when the sun is the most intense. So we're walking a balancing act on some of these elements. And then also the bottom one, the possibility that the project can achieve higher density goals, probably more appropriate for like a mitigation project. You're already going above and beyond in terms of density. And so, making the units smaller to add more density wasn't necessarily lining up with exactly what your goals are. So I think that covers the unit sizes. And then the next one being and we're still on due diligence, the next one being the airport obstruction evaluation. This is all you, Laura.
So this is a new one. And we met with the FAA reviewer who walked us through the process. We presented the project to him, and there were no immediate red flags raised. We submitted all of our applications, and they were reviewed for completeness, so that process is underway. Prior to this, sometime last fall, we also met with the folks looking at the airport expansion, and again, at this point, the folks that are most keenly tied to airspace don't have any immediate concerns, and we'll be working with them through this obstruction evaluation process to ultimately reach the determination of no hazard for the project. So it's underway.
Yeah.
Yay.
I think I get to continue on this one. I
still
do.
going.
So again, as part of our sustainability certification, Enterprise Green Communities Plus, one of the components of that is doing a resilience assessment. And what that is that identifies risks inherent to the site. It's probably not a huge surprise that we'll find that wildfire is the biggest risk to this particular site. But with that, it also identifies design strategies, and so we'll get into some of those going on. But this was also part of the due diligence that came about specifically as part of our sustainable certification process.
And again, this is a specific requirement of the application, asking us to address this and point out concerns or issues. So again, that's why we're kind of putting in these same orders as the application, just so we're going to be including this type of information.
So similarly, the application requires community outreach. You could tell us right now, you've done enough community outreach and override the need for any more community outreach. But the hazard with this sort of measured community-based approach to the design is sort of like people forget all of the community outreach and all of the effort that went into it along the way. And you know that we started in the fall of 2019. We've already had 4 rounds of community outreach by now, but back in 2019, we had outreach number 1, where we were asking a lot of very basic questions about the, about the site and about what what's important to people when it comes to this development. Things like the population served, things like, should there be a future building supply operation? Remember, we went through all that related to the existing Lumberyard. Should there be mixed use? Transportation and transit, is this site appropriate for development in terms of noise and air quality, parks and open space? We brought that back to you and created sort of those density heat maps, you'll remember, and then sort of brought all that stuff back out for the second round of outreach, which was in early 2020, was a series of stakeholder meetings and open houses, and included an open house near the ABC, so trying to focus on the ABC. Heard things like the site's appropriate for housing, serve a variety of demographics, the trail connections and access to transit are all important. Heard loud and clear from the folks out near the ABC area, don't underpark it because that's only going to make our parking impacts at the ABC worse. Mitigate noise as much as possible. But we also started running into questions about density, like some disagreement about less density, more density. And as we go to the next slide, we started to put together these density concepts in 2020. We were in the thick of the COVID stay-at-home order. We were having all our work sessions online, right?
I missed that.
And you guys asked us to explore higher density alternatives than we had initially brought to you, right? To try to push the envelope of what the site can comfortably hold. We then had outreach number 3, which was in the fall of 2020, was completely online. Email, website, surveys. We were pushing out as much email as possible to try to get surveys back. We got more information about the unit mix. People wanted us to add 2-bedroom units to the unit mix. It was around that time when we started to talk about eliminating the studios and converting all those to 1-bedrooms. Less of a focus on 3-bedroom units. We started heading in a direction of more underground parking. We started getting into more details, right? And then when we had the conceptual designs that came out of that, we had a few concepts, and we landed on that 310 unit density level at our 100% conceptual design. But you folks here had some concerns about the 100% underground parking, some of the alignment of the buildings. And so that's when we brought this group in with the immediate focus of trying to give you alternatives to that 100% underground parking. You'll recall that they provided you with 4 different site schemes that provided different levels of surface parking and underground parking. We settled on that hinge site concept, which you see there in the upper left, at the time, which was about 40% underground parking. And then we began to further evolve that towards your 100% schematic design. Hang on, got ahead of myself. On the right there, outreach number 4, we brought those 4 concepts out for more community input on underground parking, the parking quantity, the project priorities, some of the amenities and open space. And after that, on the next slide, we then came back to this table, 50% schematic design, 75% schematic design, all that work that you put into this, right? Based on all that community input. So ended up with 277 units with 467 bedrooms, 100% 4-story. About half of the parking is underground, about half of the parking is on the site. You've got a bunch of open site area that is all strategically oriented for sun angles and the best utility we can get out of that. Told to celebrate the solar and get all that on top of the roof, aiming at that 75% renewable offset. So from that point, we want to take the contents of the development application, kind of in the format that you're seeing it today, and bring that out for more community outreach to sort of reinvigorate the conversation with the community that says, here's the contents of the development application. After all the work that went into it, start to hear back from folks and have that in hand, that feedback in hand while we sit here and have the public hearings for the review and approval process during the formal land use regulatory meetings.
Chris, can you just help me understand? So this will come forward. There will be public hearings. People will be able to comment on the final plan. How is this outreach going to be different? Are we hoping to make changes from it? I mean, help me understand that.
It's mostly expected just to have us hear from the community a lot of things that we're probably going to hear during the public hearing process. It just won't be a surprise.
It's specifically a part of the development application process, so it's alerting the community to this project's moving forward. Here's what we heard from you when we were in front of you previously. Here's what we did with that. Here's how we've updated that. Here's some advancements of those ideas and the updated renderings and other things. And then just talking through some specifics about the development application itself and why we have to do that, what's going to be included in it. Our hope is that it just is keeping the transparency and just being available. And it's been a while since we were out in front of the public, so we thought that it made sense, but it's also a requirement as part of the development application to have enhanced public participation.
Is this something that you guys do in other projects, and sort of how does it, I mean, there's sort of predictable pushback to any project that we know is going to come.
Just, I could probably help clarify.
Okay.
So, we have the pre-application conference with community development. They sort of create a checklist of things that we're required to do. And they looked at the community outreach requirement. They're like, naturally, you're required to do community outreach associated, with this development application. Now, you could waive that because you know that we've already done 4 rounds of community outreach, and we could submit with our application the 4 hefty summary reports that we have and check that community outreach box. But that does miss the opportunity to sort of reinvigorate that conversation, remind everybody, hey, we're submitting the formal land use application, always a big deal in Aspen, and those public hearings are going to be coming up. Let's hear what everyone has to say about this, gather all that community input about what's being submitted, so that when we sit here and people are, lined up to give their comments, it's nothing new. It's things that you've already heard through this next round of outreach. So it's an opportunity to further engage with the community related specifically to the formal land use process.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you for the clarification. The question is, have you guys seen that be helpful? Because I guess the concern I have is if we're going out to sort of understand what's coming, we kind of understand what's coming already, and does the feeling then become, rather than we've had 4 rounds of really taking in and being responsive, all that gets remembered is the 5th round where we took in, didn't make any changes, and now you come back thinking we haven't listened at all. So,
So the nature of this public meeting would be more an update, less like pick option 1, option 2, what do you like, vote, give us your feedback in that way. We really just felt like it was, the word I used a few minutes ago was transparency.
Inform.
Just being available and being able to just have the issues, because we think there's so many important guiding principles that we keep focusing on and hitting on, that the more people in the community that understand that that's the backbone, that's the basis of these decisions, our hope is that folks will see it as a positive thing and recognize the benefits to the community. So that's our thought about it, in addition to what Chris just described as our understanding that it was necessary due to what community development is saying. These are the things you need to do in order to get this development application processed.
got it, understood. Yeah, curious to hear thoughts. If it's simply a presentation about how our public outreach has informed this and that people have already been heard, that's great. I just am mindful of not opening the door to something that we're not going to be responsive about.
That's part of the format is to say, here are the things we heard. And here's how the current designs are reflective of what we heard. I'll just randomly say parking as an example. So, we're concerned about parking. How does this not make our problems worse? Well, here's exactly what we heard. Here's how we've incorporated that, and here's how the project is dealing with that. So, hopefully we will be able to demonstrate to people that, we did hear a lot of what they said. You heard a lot of what they said and directed us to bake that into the designs.
Got it. Thank you.
At the risk of sounding cynical, I predict there will be people at this outreach who'll say, this is the first I ever heard of this.
Of course. And that's okay.
That will happen.
Be disappointed if they didn't say that.
Okay, there we go. I think it'll be good.
Thank you.
So as part of that, we're going to have to name these streets something, and that information is going to have to come from somewhere. So we thought it would be kind of a fun and new aspect of the upcoming community outreach to have a street naming exercise, give people the opportunity to weigh in on some potential themes. in terms of a lumberyard theme with wood-related type of themes, perhaps some others that we can vet with the Aspen Historical Society to make sure that we're presenting options that make sense for Aspen. Wanted to get your take on whether or not you think that's a useful component to the outreach. It doesn't need to necessarily be binding.
I have a suggestion. Snow sport. Feudal Pfeiffer Place, Roach Road, Stein Erickson Street, Obermeyer, Beatty, Huga, Bill Merle, Spider Savage, Blyler, Davenport, Klug.
I would, go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say, I would leave space for people to put in their own, certainly whether it's a theme or just one or two individual names. I would personally drop the Native American theme that you've put forward. We're seeing schools throughout Colorado dropping their team names, and far too often it's considered an insult or patronizing rather than an acknowledgement or recognition.
Can I just comment on that? Because I was going to mention that one as well. I don't want to drop it, but before we offer it, I want to check in with the community and see if they would receive it as an acknowledgement. Because if they would, then that's great. But if they would receive it as something that is in any way harmful, I don't want to put that out there.
To the organizers
let's
of
check in
the
first.
Ute Indian celebration.
Please.
You might want to eliminate the term Indian from.
Yeah, I thought that too.
For starters.
I thought that too.
I was just going to suggest Salter Lane under Aspen Authors. That's just me.
What about Doyle Way?
I was thinking about Semple as well.
Artist theme.
Under the authors, but we'll let that go.
So are you asking if we would like that included in the public outreach?
One way or another, the streets are going to need to be named.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the person who names them. I was looking for some input on, something to make it a community exercise. I doubt we'll get our definitive answer out of the exercise, and ultimately, it's probably going to come back to you. But just wanted to see if you were interested in the opportunity to make that part of the community engagement.
Yeah. Test the appropriateness, go to the poll, come on back.
What do you think of John?
I was just thinking, well, the streets in the ABC are named after Monopoly. What other board game options do we have?
Board game options.
On
Chris,
risk.
yes, I
all the good
think there's some changes even to these that are presented here that would be appropriate. But yes, I think that you should include it, even if it's just to add a little bit of fun,
Yeah.
and a little bit of direct input. Our community, time and time again, shows up for things like that and enjoys that process, even though they're, whether it's winter skull themes, whether it's the like. So anyway, yes, I think we would like you to figure out how to incorporate that in some fun way.
We'll work on that, and we'll make sure that we want to provide some examples. We'll make sure that the examples we're providing are appropriate, and we'll also leave plenty of room for write-in opportunities.
Great.
I think involving the public's a great idea.
Yeah.
Public outreach roundabout.
Now it's the Randy Show.
All right.
I got to name a street.
Yeah.
So we've kept this vision very near and dear to our hearts as we've made all of our thoughts and decisions and steps. So a stable, thriving, affordable neighborhood that's pedestrian-friendly, environmentally sustainable, it's connected and welcoming, that looks, lives, and feels authentically Aspen, has been at the core of all of our design decisions and our efforts. We did spend a lot of time looking back at your vision about housing and the town's philosophy about what's important, and you'll see a lot of familiarity, a lot of similarity in those words and those thoughts that have showed up in the decisions that have been made. We've also spent that time looking at Aspen-Pitkin County Housing Authority's mission statement, and combining these together into that vision has been guiding datum for us as we've moved through each step.
I would make this your first slide of your public communication.
Thank you. Great suggestion. So we have these categories of these big guiding principles of community connection, sustainability, pedestrian-friendly, living well, and authentically Aspen, and we'll go into details of these later in the presentation, but those common themes run through the underlying decisions that have been made and the guiding principles around the design and the interaction and the relationships. And those have been translated into the engineering details that the rest of our team will be presenting here in a few minutes.
Yeah, so we'll get into those in a little more detail. Quick time check, we've got a ways to go.
Yeah, we do.
So we do want to pick it up for you because there is some stuff sort of at the tail end, it's like dimensional requirements and stuff. We do want to get to that. So
Let's do
Giles
it.
is up next with the proposed project.
Right.
Site plan.
Fast as possible, right. Well, since we last met in June, we all gathered and just want to review the site design changes that we've gone over and how that fits into the sausage mold of the PD application compliance. So one of the things that wasn't working so well is some of the grading of the buildings and the elevations of the buildings. So we've pushed buildings 2 and building 3 down. We pushed building 3 to the east and to the south. These are subtle nuances that you may or may not pick up on, but I thought since it took us a bloody long time to figure out, I thought we'd go over it. We also changed the road between the Mountain Rescue and Building 2. We flipped the parking to the other side, so it's closer to Building 2, which is a great improvement.
More convenient for the residents.
More convenient. As a part of the grading exercise, we had to move the garage access on Building 3 slightly west, and that has actually provided us a lot more room at that corner to put in more infrastructure such as transformers. And talking of transformers, we have now a lot more information about the battery packs that are going to be needed to pull the energy and store it from the rooftops. So those are being incorporated and they've been pulled out of the garages and put onto the surface. And they do have somewhat of a sizable footprint, but very important addition. So they've been brought to the surface and we've been able to move some of the parking spaces that were allocated to those battery storage areas in the garages down there. So those have been some of the major changes. We have eliminated some of the sidewalks that seemed unnecessary and in places that we didn't really want people walking, such as either side of the walkway to Highway 82. We've been tweaking some of the access points from the proposed underpass connecting to our transit station. We're also thinking about how to reuse all these materials that we're going to be demoing from the Lumberyard buildings, and so we're going to be working hard on how to use that into the transit stations, shelters. We're also thinking about a dog wash and a bike wash station in that same vicinity. And so those are going to be constructed, hopefully, using some of the recycled materials, and so they don't go anywhere but stay on site. So we can use our imagination on that. We've cleaned up the plaza somewhat. To aggregate some of the stormwater areas, the rain gardens, into this sort of major circular feature that'll likely have a bench around it. So we've really focused a lot of time and energy on that, and to provide the patios off the north side of Building 2 with some very nice areas to look at. And by lowering the grade there, we've also engaged them a lot closer to the ground than they were before, so they'll actually be able to have some access on some of those balconies straight down to the plaza, which is great. And so there's also been some tweaks in the buildings that we've acknowledged and recycled, such as some of the sort of kitchen facilities, the gym and things like that on the tail end of Building 1. Thank you, Laura. And yeah, and we've incorporated even more rain gardens than we had before. So we're very enthusiastic. So how does that all fit into the sausage mold of PD application? Well, we've provided buildings that have been sited very much to maximize the outdoor spaces, which serve to provide outdoor living and for both public and private spaces. Environmental mitigation such as snow storage and on-site stormwater management. The site is connected to adjacent neighborhoods very well. You can see that we've actually incorporated the future closure of the American Lane connection. and how that's all going to flow into the ABC community and Annie Mitchell and the surrounding buildings. We've in terms of the species, I guess we can move on to communal landscapes. The next slide, please. We have, designed this dense neighborhood, but really requires these amazingly well-designed shared outdoor spaces, the plazas, the trails, the amenities to promote all healthy communities. The space we provided is for gatherings, it's for playgrounds, for multiple age groups, and unprescribed outdoor uses. The site is also connected to a greater trails network. We've been working closely with the Parks Department on all their requests regarding the trails and the trail connections, and their input has been invaluable. And as I said, we're also providing this bike wash, dog wash gathering station, which I think is going to be great, not just for the Lumberyard, but for folks going into the ABC and living in the North 40 who want to clean their bikes and wash their dogs after they've come off Sky Mountain. Moving on to exterior lighting, because I know we're in a bit of a rush. We've discussed all lighting with the engineering department. We want to make sure that we're in cahoots with the standards. There are really no standards right now, so we've come up with a whole new slew of lights. Everything is consistent with the city's intents and purposes as outlined in the night sky ordinances. Living in Burlingame Phase 1 and in comparison to Burlingame Phase 2, we're looking for this Goldilocks zone, not too light, not too bloody dark. Burlingame Phase 1's far too dark, and Burlingame Phase 2 is probably a little overlit. So we're striking the difference between the two, only using fixtures really for public safety and visibility, nothing being highlighted or anything like that. So that's the lighting.
Can I just make one small comment about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the totality of the lighting, the meeting codes is all great, but just, it's a small detail, but just like warm lighting makes such a huge difference for sense of place and community, and so just as long as we're mindful of that.
Yeah, the color rendering will always be in the 2000 to 2500, all LED, and nothing's going to look cool and mercurial. So.
Okay, cool.
Yes, very warm lighting. Vehicular access, the big one here, obviously, is the new stoplight at Highway 82. And it obviously creates a much safer entry and exit. And the proposed signalized intersection is consistent with the CDOT access control plan, and it will be permitted through the CDOT process. And CDOT's reviewed this and has basically given us an email saying, gives us the thumbs up from a preliminary approval. We obviously met, and Rich will get into this in a minute, we met with the Aspen Fire Department very early on in the process to make sure we were in alignment with their standards, and that safety was the utmost importance, and they could fight fires and have emergency access to all buildings wherever needed. Obviously, we've created this road network that's been pushed to the perimeter, allowing the central core to be free-flowing of pedestrians. This, first and foremost, was always designed to be a pedestrian-centric area. Per Randy's slew early on, we can't emphasize that enough. It's just you're coming into this zone that is hopefully devoid of vehicles and happy people on bikes and whatnot. So that was a big emphasis on why we had that elevated plaza to begin with, to prioritize pedestrians, free-flowingly crossing between the plaza and the transit center, and that cars feel like they're playing a second, third, or even fourth fiddle to what's going on in this area. They slow down and are very aware that they are in a pedestrian zone. Obviously we've talked a little bit about the underpass. That, as I said, has been given preliminary approval, as well as the intersection by CDOT. And I guess that sort of overlaps into pedestrian access, which is the next slide. We had a big emphasis on ADA access and accessibility, and the new grading study that we undertook through the DD process really has helped provide a lot more accessibility with fewer ramps to the buildings, and being able to cite the parking spaces, 88 parking spaces, far closest to the entrances due to those grading alterations. Yeah. What else have I got?
All the linkages to all the trails, the existing trails, and
Yeah, we've been working hard with the Aspen Parks Department on that. But yeah, you know, I'm under stress here. I've got to get a move on. You know.
Pretty good.
Moving on.
Hang on, Rachel?
Yeah, just one real quick comment. I think it looks great. I can tell the hard work you've put into it and making it just feel right in a very tight space. I know that people go outside to barbecue in the summer, and you're going to have to think about whether you install a couple of the barbecue grates
I think we should.
in
for
one
sure.
of these spots, because otherwise people pull out their own, they pull out steamers, they attach things to the bike racks. We deal with that at Hunter Creek all the time.
Yeah.
So you'll want to plan for that and where they can have a
Every
picnic
single
bench or two.
patio has been designed to accommodate some sort of grill.
Okay, well,
She's
yeah,
talking about like.
I know, a community grill. But I we haven't found
that
those to
people
be
go out and they
tremendously
do
successful.
it all summer long. And so we
Okay.
need a spot, or otherwise people are going to be putting their Webers on their decks, you know, and we don't want that, Weber grills. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. On to Rich,
All right.
the Irishman.
Yeah, so the application will have a civil engineering requirement. Oops, sorry. Civil engineering requirement in the application, and also the PD will have to memorialize the utilities, and there's actually been a great deal of work that you probably has been going on in the background you're not familiar with. Rich is going to enlighten us on a lot of the civil engineering to this point.
Okay. Yeah, as Chris says, you probably haven't seen any of the civil engineering to date. We have been doing a lot of work in the background. One of the big things we've been doing is been meeting with CDOT, city engineering, city utilities, fire. We've met with pretty much every stakeholder to get input on this site plan. So we kind of took this, as well as working with the constraints of the site, which you know, there's existing utilities out there, but they don't really have capacity for what we're trying to do. We grade the site to kind of follow the natural contours, try and minimize cut and fill. You know, the site generally slopes to the northeast to where that pond is. And one of the other major components is we spent a lot of time understanding the drainage patterns, water coming into the site off the highway and leaving the site into the ABC, where they've had some drainage issues. That's got really nothing to do with this project. So saying that, this is kind of an overall view. Everything's on there. We are proposing to upgrade the water, the sewer, the electricity, pretty much all the utilities. There's nothing there that we can reuse. It just doesn't have capacity. You're going to install a pretty significant drainage system, and I'll get into a little more detail in a minute. And we're also going to do the intersection, as Giles touched on. The intersection is being driven by projected traffic, and also the underpass came out of some meetings with parks where they wanted to maintain that trail connectivity along the highway there, and we just felt there would just be way too many conflicts without doing a grade separation in that location. As Giles mentioned, the CDOT work is consistent with their access control plan. They have one for this area of highway, and they identified our new intersection and also, you know, cutting off Sage Way at some point. But that Sage Way cutoff cannot happen until the new intersection is fully functional. And that's, I believe that the county was part of that process as well, because that's actually county land right there. So just on some of the safety improvements, obviously we talked about the intersection, the trail, the storm system will improve downstream, will reduce runoff downstream. And also we spent a pretty significant amount of time with the fire department, making sure, I think we probably met them 3 or 4 times to make sure our road widths are big enough for their trucks. They have to be slightly wider with these taller buildings. Also that we've got turnarounds at these dead ends, and it's, you know, it's pretty much a looped system. And Jan Gowski did give us a sign off on the site plan, so she's happy with it. I don't think we'll have any surprise from fire later on. So going on to utilities, the next slide. So the utility upgrades are, say, pretty significant. We have to relocate, the sewer is the green line. We have to relocate about 1,600 linear feet of sewer. One, because it doesn't have capacity, the sewer that kind of runs down through to the east of building 1 there, that we can't use that. It's only an 8-inch line, and we're upgrading to 12. And then we had to run it around behind Mountain Rescue because it conflicted with the underpass. So that's the reason for the routing. The water lines are all brand new water lines. It's looped. We got some input from Justin at the Utilities Department very early on, and we basically complied with all their comments. They're currently doing some water modeling to determine final sizing and how this whole thing plugs into the overall City of Aspen water system. One thing that came out of that as well is this is going to be a City of Aspen electric project. We're going to get power from Volt at the end of 200 ABC Road there and run city power into the site. No gas, obviously, and then we've got to do some relocation of utilities again to make room for the underpass. That location of the underpass has just got a lot of utilities in that right there, so we got to move some stuff there.
Rich, you've gotten will-serve letters from all the utility companies.
We've spoken, we've coordinated
Yeah.
with the utility companies. They've all told us they've got the ability to serve this project with their current plans.
And we need to rip up American Lane to put in that
We will.
electric line. Yeah,
We will.
That's not like in a right.
So the upper leftmost point you see there, right under the words utility plan, is where we connect to the electric grid. That's all the way at the end of 200 Road.
Yep.
The east end of 200 Road. So we actually have to get a permit with Pickens County to trench along American Way. So we're going to be, seeking permits in the city of Aspen, seeking permits in Pickens County to connect to that as well. So there's a lot of utility work, and Rich mentioned the trail underpass at the entrance to the site where the signalized intersection will be. That work in the CDOT right-of-way is going to be pretty extensive as well. We're going to talk about the phasing plan a little bit more as we go ahead. But there's actually a lot of utility work that the city needs to take on to get the site ready for the development.
So when do you go in front of the county to get their permission?
That would be a road cut permit. I think I'd start with talking to GR Fielding, but it's a road cut utility permit to install the electric. It's an electric line, a sewer line that needs to go.
Under the American Way?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So it's an administrative decision, or does it rise to the
Typically,
BSCC?
Yeah, typically it's a utility permit.
Okay.
it's
I'm just
part of the-
wondering, because we've heard some doubts from some of the board members there about moving forward with the project at all, and I was wondering if that was a potential kill switch for them.
I don't think so. I've done electrical lines in the county before, and it's a road cut permit.
Okay, we'll see. Thank you.
So there's the drainage. So we became aware that there was some downstream drainage issues in that number 2 triangle there, and the 200 ABC Road. That location is very, very flat. There's just an ongoing drainage issue out there. So when we became aware of that, we said we wanted to try and decrease the amount of runoff coming off that triangle 1 above what code requires. So code requires us to reduce it down to 20 cubic feet per second in a 100-year storm. What's currently flowing off the Lumberyard is about 30 because of all the paving and buildings and stuff that's there. We'd be able to get that down to 11. So we're almost a third of what's really going on there. And that will certainly help that downstream problem that they have, an ongoing downstream problem they have there. If you go out there today, there's sandbags and stuff in front of their doors. It's an ongoing issue, but we're vastly improving that.
So big improvements to the adjacent neighborhood by virtue of the good stormwater design on the Lumberyard site.
Nice.
And we're doing that with a number of tools that are available in the current drainage code. There's 3 ponds. There's one at that triangle 1. There's one upstream, and then there's one kind of near the dog wash center. As I mentioned earlier, we are receiving highway water right now, it's these culverts come in from the highway and they end up on the site. So what we're trying to do here is intercept this water before it hits the site with those two ponds that are in the yellow and the by Mountain Rescue there. We're also then, as Giles mentioned, we're doing a lot of rain gardens above grade storage, and we're considering green roofs and pervious pavers, all stuff that the URMP kind of encourages projects to do. If we were to reduce the site to have zero runoff, we would have to do a lot of underground storage if there was ever a desire that at that point one there that nothing at all flows off the site. It's feasible, but it's going to be a lot of money to do it, and also it changed the current drainage code.
When you say ponds, does that mean that they would be kind of dry holding areas until there is such a rainfall, and then they would be evaporation ponds?
They would infiltrate. And
and
the
evaporate.
one at number one there will have an outlet structure, which will, there's a pipe there, a 36-inch pipe, and what we'll do will be a controlled release. We would be releasing at that in a 100-year storm, releasing at that 11 CFS as opposed to the 30 that's currently flowing off it now again in 100-year storms. Not that this happens every day.
And so I'm just kind of thinking that for the most part, they would appear like a grassy basin until they get filled and then they drain out, but they wouldn't become a permanent mud hole.
No, the soil out there is
Permeable.
it is. It's kind of cobbly, pit runny type soil. It's permeable. These will drain out. I mean, the code dictates that these things drain out within 24 hours, so that there isn't, standing water there.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you for the detail.
Yeah, because the Lumberyard has like all paved area nowadays, we've heard from the owner of the property who built the new storage facility, it's shown in orange right there to the upper left, that they have problems under the existing condition. We started off with the aim of improving that, first meeting code, but secondarily improving upon that. But then we further heard that, sometimes the drainage problems go all the way across the street to like the ski.com building. So Rich met with GR Fielding out there to sort of look at those impacts. So, we're going to be reducing all of that considerably by just sending much less water that way.
Very good.
Okay, I think that's it for drainage. And then what you have here is a typical cross-section of the street. So you got the travel lanes, you've got you have sidewalk, grass buffer. We've got this grass buffer, which was a request from engineering very early on, and that's going to be used for both rain gardens for stormwater and also for snow storage. It also provides a separation between traffic and pedestrians. The parking, as much parking as we can is going to be pervious pavers, again reducing runoff. Some of this stuff is covered as well. Let me see what else I have in here. Also, all the sidewalks, as Giles mentioned, meet ADA code. And one thing I want to bring up as well is the typical the right-of-way per the engineering code is 72 feet. The right-of-way should grant. This is not going to have 72 feet of right-of-way, and the reason being is we've got a lot of these streets have covered parking, which is attached to the buildings, so to speak. It's parking for the buildings, and we think it would be inappropriate to make that part of the right-of-way. So the right-of-way is going to be slightly narrower. The right-of-way will go from back of sidewalk to the edge of that parking.
Ward, question?
Sure.
Yeah, but the entrance where the projected traffic light is going to be and into the transportation center, is that going to be concrete? It seems like
that's concrete there, that part, yes. The rest of it's going to be asphalt.
So concrete, yeah. Colored concrete.
And then we have one or two little pieces of right-of-way that are down to 23 feet, and the reason for them is these fire truck turnarounds. We didn't see any reason to have big right-of-ways around the fire truck turnaround. We granted enough right-of-way that the truck turnaround could fit in there.
And the reason Rich is pointing that out, we have to create this list of variances or variation requests as part of the application. So you'll see a chart later in the presentation that kind of goes through, so you'll see that 23-foot recognition showing up there.
But in general, around the site, like the roadways are actually wider in general than what we have, for example, at Burlingame today. Engineering asked us to sort of widen those things. You already have buses and fire truck access there. This will be sort of improved as compared to that. Yeah, and in terms of technical compliance, there are some sort of exception spots, so we have to note that in the application. There are some areas where we vary slightly from the code requirement, but under the PD, that gets ironed out. So all of Rich's work has been vetted. The engineering department and the other departments that we've had to work with on all this stuff have been extremely cooperative throughout this process.
Very good.
Yeah, we've got a lot of valuable input along the way from people, so this won't be the first time they see it.
One last thing about the potential, about this road section is that it's not only working, utility-based, but it's also providing and re-emphasizing that pedestrian experience, right? So making sure that there's separation between the pedestrian walkway and the roadway. That's all intentional, right? To create that sense of neighborhood and a place where people want to walk.
Very good.
I think the next
How are we
slide
doing on
is-
time?
I think it's the next slide, someone else.
We got to go
So,
faster.
yep,
One, two,
we can
skip
speed it up. We'll speed up here. So another section in the application is we have to point out any kind of hazards and any kind of mitigation that might be necessary to make this site usable. We've already talked about the fact that there's no geotechnical issues, there's no environmental issues. This is a safe site. There's not mudslide issues, there's not flooding issues. So we've also focused on the resiliency issues, and we'll get into some of those details some more. So just walking you through the subdivision parcels. We've talked many times about the idea that this is going to be a phased development, and we talked about phase 1 being building 1, phase 2 being building 2, and phase 3 being building 3. So building 1, the parcels that are part of that are this 1A in green, and then you see 1B and 1C and 1D. The B, C, and D have all the parking that's at the surface that's necessary for compliance. Likewise, at Building 2, that's called Parcel 2A for the main part where the building is, and then Parcel 2B is the parking that's associated with it. And then Parcel 3 is everything that's necessary for the Building 3 building, and including the parcel, or all the parking there. And there's, the reason it doesn't have those sub-parcels is it's all connected. It's not separated completely by the public right-of-way. So everything in white, the street layouts that you see, that's all public streets with the appropriate public right-of-ways working themselves through. So Parcel 5 up near the entrance is a stormwater parcel, and then Parcel 6 back in the back of the site, that triangle back there, is another stormwater parcel. Parcel 4 is the future childcare parcel, so it's set up. So we've got, I think, a total of 10 specific parcels.
So there's also, in the technical compliance, there's a minimum lot width. You'll see we're requesting a variance in minimum lot width because, for example, right next to the childcare, you've got that long green strip. It's called Parcel 1B. Like, the width of that narrow strip doesn't meet the minimum lot width requirements in the code. We're asking for an exception to that. So just want to point out things like that where your application's going to use the PD overlay to handle those exceptions.
And one of the important parts of the development application is we need to communicate that each of these phases, each of these parcels can be built and can be fully occupied and function on their own. So that's the case with the way this is organized. Parcel Building 1 and Phase 1 could get built, and it could get occupied, and there could be a construction fence essentially right there separating Building 1 from Building 2, or Parcel 1 from Parcel 2, and the construction of Building 2 could be going on. So that's an important part of the development application, to be able to point out that as it's phased, it is buildable and safe and occupiable as each phase progresses.
And the utilities will be in place for all three phases initially, as well as the site work and drainage, so that there won't be that needing to go forward.
You're exactly right.
explained
You're
that
exactly
slide.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Next slide, then.
So,
Tell us the rest of the meeting.
we're calling it Phase 0. We see the city having to come in and do all of this infrastructure. The work that Rich talked about at the entrance with the traffic light and the underpass and in the CDOT right-of-way, that's going to be some of the first stuff that people see, right? And so, in terms of the city's activity on the site, getting this site ready, there is some sort of heavy lifting that the city's doing up front, putting all the utilities in the roadways, doing all the deep utilities, and then putting a temporary layer of asphalt on the site. At like the Burlingame site, for example, we did Burlingame 2, and then we did the Burlingame 3 phase. We didn't have that sort of temporary paved road, but because of the amount of activity that's going to be going on here, it's really being recommended to us that we have that temporary asphalt in place, that we later put the permanent public infrastructure in place. So the Phase 0 is going to be, a $15 million project. It's actually a huge utilities project to get this site ready. The subdivision parcels that Randy just showed you line up with this phasing so that we can make each site, each phase work and operational as we then move on to the next. So we see that demolition and recycling start to happen in 2024, start the infrastructure project, see that continuing through 2025. And during that time, we've already started the process of soliciting, public bids for private developers to come in and go to the next slide and start that Phase 1, Building 1 development. So when they come in, let's say it's a private developer, we've estimated this phase at some $126 million. To be done around 2026, 2027. So, a private developer who we select, if we can get that kind of participation, puts that phase in place, gets that occupied. You've got access now throughout that whole area, but, we sort of have the rest of the site still ready to be developed for the next phase. And so if you go on to the next slide, we then move on to the second building, the second phase. Right now, we're calling that 2028, 2029. We're right now estimating that at around $116 million as a phase. And so, again, could be another private developer comes in and does that. So now you'll have, as a result of that, you'll have Phase 1 and Phase 2 completed and fully operational, and that will then take us to the next slide, Phase 3. We know that this is the ownership component of the site. Could be a private developer, could end up being the city for numerous different reasons. This is going to be 2030, 2031. Current estimate on that is around $135 million. This is a very aggressive schedule that I've just outlined. Some questions about, can we fund it to be done that quickly? So it could be that it ends up taking a little bit longer. So when we set up the vested rights in the approval ordinance, probably going to give ourselves some buffer time beyond sort of the dates that we're showing here. I know when we did Burlingame 2/3, we get 10-year vested rights. You may want to do 12 to 15-year vested rights on this. So that will be part of the application as well.
In Phase 0, are you planning on running fiber?
Where did we land on fiber?
Right, so for Shelley Utilities right now, we're looking at Comcast, but there's a possibility that the city may be able to provide it. Currently, they don't do residential, but I spoke to City IT, and then there's another firm, Pathfinder, that's going to be running fiber up and down the highway. So we know we can get Comcast, but we're looking at the other two as well.
Yeah, if we at least run the conduit,
Yeah.
while you have the road.
Yeah. And Ward, in terms of traditional developments, wiring for Cat5 networks and things like that, like we've done that in most of our developments. And at the same time, for this development, we're going so far out into the future, we're still in, the early sort of stages of the design of that. Like, I doubt we're going to want to do, inside wiring on these buildings like Cat5, Cat6, enhanced. probably just all going to be, Wi-Fi to a degree. And so one of the things we're trying to get a beat on is what are developments like this doing as technology is going pretty fast nowadays? What's the right way to set this up? Do we just bring in a big fiber connection at the building level, provide Wi-Fi access throughout, and then we don't need all that inside wiring? People are just going to hook up to Wi-Fi and do their casting and use their devices the way everyone does now. So,
Yeah, just to have that broadband in the utilities phase.
Oh, it will be, yes. Yes, absolutely.
Rachel?
Well, I was just going to tag on to Ward's saying and say, let's make sure it's at some level coordinating with the county's redundancy broadband system that they're developing, which means that when one line gets cut by somebody, the broadband comes back in the other, even if it's just the conduit, as Ward is saying, so we're prepared. But the county's been doing a really large effort, and we should make sure it's all integrated. Thank you.
Chris, can I just clarify one thing? So I understand that the phased approach is what, we estimate is sort of the best path forward and what we'll be able to achieve. But if through some form of magic, a private developer says we can do more than one of these at the same time or some unique capital stack, we're not precluding that.
Yeah, that's correct. No, absolutely not. And, it's important to note that, like, our financial models that, Pete Strecker lets us show to you are like, his sort of conservative RET projections.
Right.
We often see the RET outperform some of the finance projections, but that they're just doing the jobs. They have to do it that way, right? Yeah. And so it could be that you actually can afford to do phases 1 and 2 at the same time, right? If we don't see this downturn in the RET, and if we see the RET continue to provide these, really high levels of revenues, you probably could be able to afford to do phases 1 and 2 at the same time. We want to set up the approvals, the plan development, the ordinance, and have it all set up so that you have the flexibility to either go phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, or do a phase 1 and 2.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And to that actually leads to my hopefully my last question here. On parcel 4, which is the childcare, I know we're saying that we're holding that, and some of us think that's even a better place for childcare. I'm just wondering, are we putting restrictions on that in the way that on the Lumberyard, if we want to switch to the affordable housing, now we have to get 100%. We're not proposing anything like that here, are we?
Well, one of the things that we don't have is a connection to an existing HOA, which would put a limitation on adding units, right? So another city council in the future could come in and say, we're going to do childcare and we're going to put some units on top of that childcare or somehow adjacent to that childcare.
Okay.
You'd be less limited here in trying to do that than you are in some other places.
Great. Yeah, I just don't want to put any unnecessary restrictions on future councils.
Yeah, but how, for example, affordable housing on parcel 4 in that diagram, affordable housing is already an approved use
Great.
for that area and also is childcare.
Awesome.
So it's 20 after 6.
I noticed that.
We need to go through all of this, and we need to go through it thoroughly, but we do need to also try to move through this.
Please.
We're going to pick it up.
7 o'clock would kind of be our 4-hour hit.
My
at
brain
which
is already
time we
melting a
would,
little.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that significantly.
And we thought this
We
would
are,
be
and the
the
good news
section.
is, this was the section we thought, we can help compress this, because you've seen this before.
Great.
So what we will attempt to do is go through this section specifically as it relates to the development application. But I'm going to look directly at my teammates and, give me the high sign if we're lingering.
Yeah.
So we've been through the guiding principles, we've been through the design drivers, but what I really want to point out here is, as it relates to our application, is that this was our high-level guiding principles. Each one of these has been influenced by the due diligence that you have done to date. So the noise study, that 65 DNL setback line, we're respecting that. That's going towards our building siting. And that's buffering our open space with our buildings. It's really influenced our site design. The community engagement process that has been fairly extensive to date has been a big influencer in establishing these guiding principles and establishing the design moving forward. Specifically, we heard about exterior access. People liked that idea of accessing units from the exterior, and so we were able to accomplish that. In fact, by going to elbow room and shifting our unit count downward slightly, we're able to ensure that all of those ground floor units have exterior access.
Which is 25% of the units.
It's a lot. And specifically, the approach is creating a neighborhood. And so you're seeing how that begins to impact our 11.3 acres when we carve out public streets and begin to parcel this. Public streets, it really is approaching that neighborhood feel. Again, we've been through the sustainability. I'm so excited to have heard the previous presentation on the building code pieces. I feel like we are really in alignment with city goals. And so this project, I think, begins to demonstrate all those things that we just heard. And so one of the pieces of that was this resiliency study. A number of potential vulnerabilities were identified. And so then there has been a design response in conjunction with that. So wildfire, we heard about that durability and fire resistive nature of construction. So that is going to be incorporated. The air quality piece, really that balanced ventilation, enhanced filtration, mechanical cooling, and all that is in line with these heat pumps that we're talking about that do both and are also energy efficient. Looking at the new disease vectors, integrated pest management, and then things like mud flow, really developing those site modification plans that if that were to happen on Deer Hill, what would the plan be to mitigate after that fire to help be in advance of that potential vulnerability? Again, we've looked at our duck curve here, and so just in terms of that offset discussion, we are approaching that 75% net zero mark, and a lot of that was just maximizing that roof space that we have, but the fact that we do have 277 units, and so we're putting that on 4 floors. So that proportion of roof area to building is a little bit off, which is why we aren't approaching 100, we're approaching 75. And again, part of that is that highest and best use of the land you have available.
There had been some discussions before about potentially putting solar on some of the covered parking. Has that been nixed on purpose, or is that still part of it? Yeah.
To give a little bit of background on that discussion, we're weighing a number of priorities. And so right now, we feel that we can hit that 75% mark with utilizing the solar array just on top of the buildings. Because we want to use potentially the green roof strategy for our water, stormwater mitigation, and some of those pieces that we're able to utilize those roofs. Also softer surfaces, we're really using those to help berm and be sound. So it's that balance that right now we feel confident that we can meet 75 with the building roofs to let the other roofs be green and work for us in other ways.
And another important part of the 75% offset is, of course, conserving energy. So we're having an enhanced building envelope. You already have enhanced building envelopes that you're building right now at Burlingame. These are going to be even above and beyond in terms of the amount of conservation of energy. You talked in your prior discussion about that sort of energy use on a per square foot level, that energy use intensity number. We're pushing that energy use intensity number down so that we can get this 75% offset from the amount of roof space that we have. So those things are all connected.
Thank you.
So specifically with building siting, again, digesting all of the amount of due diligence and community input and feedback, building siting is really rooted in all of that. So on one hand, the vicinity map that Chris showed, there's housing out there. This is a good spot for housing. All of our due diligence reports show that this is suitable for development. And so to do that, locating our potential future childcare site in a transitional area between our kind of business and services in the ABC, and letting that be a transition to our deeply residential area here in the Lumberyard. also, by bringing that density to the middle of our site, the higher buildings, these bigger building forms, but allowing us some space from our neighbors. So providing those setbacks from Annie Mitchell, providing those setbacks from the adjacent uses, that we're not proposing this height directly next to our neighbors. So bringing that inboard. Scale and massing, again, we're talking about bigger buildings here. And the nature of that bigger building, that 4-story, is in order to achieve our goals. To get our 277 units in, we had to go up to also balance that open space. So in this, we're looking to show that there is a precedent, but this is also, again, for that highest and best use of property in order to achieve that residential density. So going 4 stories is one of those tools that we're finding communities, frankly, all over are moving towards because, again, land is precious. So that neighborhood development, again, we've looked at this before, so that idea that this is a typical city block here in Aspen and that these buildings are commensurate with that experience. And so the creation of that street experience, we've heard it at length from Giles and Rich, that is what we're creating here. So far, the floor area ratio, again, this is part of that requirement as we get into our development application. And so we need to look at it by these individual parcels that we have broken out. And so we'll continue to work with Ben and his group for how we want to get this translated into our application, because obviously the intent is for the total site, the 11.3 acres, but that translational piece translates per parcel. And again, as we just showed you, we've got some kind of funky leftover parceling in order to carve out those public streets. So architectural design, again, that key features that we're really looking to create really nice spaces. So corridors with light and views. One of the big pieces is private patio. So that balance of this outdoor space, these large community spaces, but that each unit has some private outdoor space associated with it. Really looking for on-site amenities too as well, so some common spaces within the building that people can gather and
Interact.
Lounge.
Meet their neighbors, hang out.
Meet your neighbors, particularly when weather is inclement. One of the big pieces here is all of the units are type A or type B, so really looking towards universal design with this. And again, one of the reasons we selected this particular approach to the site was that every building will have elevator access, providing that access to every unit. And by doing it this way, we have fewer overall elevators than some of the other schemes we'd looked at. Accessibility, again, we've kind of talked about that for the total site, but that is a very important part. So again, there's accessibility from the parking spaces below the building to the elevators directly up, as well as indicated here that there's been great care to the grading so that that accessible access is provided throughout the site. Despite it being a site with overall fall, ultimately it
Like
doesn't
20 feet of fall.
look like a lot, but it is a large site. So there's about 20 feet from one end to the other. You want to take this one?
Well, let's just pop through these quick. So
I've seen 'em, you know 'em.
So you're familiar with building 1. Let's click through.
Building 2,
Building 2, and building 3.
Oh, but one thing I forgot,
Yeah, I
the
wanna do
talking
that.
point,
Let me do that.
the important talking point.
So when we get to the technical elements of the application, you know that the buildings are 4 levels, and so we're showing here is in the upper left-hand corner, 48 feet for those 4 levels of building. Because of the way height is measured in the code, when you see the technical elements of the application, that number is going to be closer to 58 feet. Not because the buildings are any taller, the majority, all the way around the buildings, they're like 48 feet. But where you enter through the garage, the height has to be measured at the worst-case spot. So you'll have a ramp going down into the garage. So the technical calculation of that height is going to be closer to 58 feet.
Because it's going to start below grade.
Because
That's
that's how height is measured under the code, but your buildings are rough, are essentially 48 feet. You're aware of that, just don't want you to be surprised when the application says height, 58 feet. And also, we'll have the ability to explain that to people. We're not like reserving the right to go even higher. No, that's just the technical calculation of height.
Yes, and we are working on diagrams to explain that better, because again, from the front, from 82, you don't have that exposed foundation.
Right.
So that experience of height, you'll see that the percentages of this are, that finished floor elevation is much closer to the typical condition. But obviously, in order to mitigate our 20 feet of fall across the site, plus access into the garages, we do have these moments. So that'll be another item that we're continuing to work on with our community development folks for how we codify that and write that in our application so that it's understood that we're really looking for this 48 feet effective height, but meeting the technical measurement of height.
Yep.
Okay,
All right.
we'll see.
I think, hold on. It freaked out. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, now it's going.
So, yeah, let's just go back one real quick. So our unit plans are as we presented them to you before. The unit mix is as we presented it to you before. 277 units, 467 bedrooms, broken down with the 3 buildings as we indicate there. We're absolutely focused on our context and taking our clues from Deer Hill and nature and what works in this environment and in this climate. We're going to spend a lot of time through design development with you all on getting into materials. So this is just a reinforcement of this is the origin and this is the inspiration of where we're going. Next. So again, with the aesthetic characteristics that we've described to you before, and we've spoke about where those come from and why those feel like appropriate inspiration points for this project. Those are still in place, and we're advancing the design of those specific components. And as we advance those through the design development process, again, we'll be back in front of you to further give you more updates and information about all those elements.
Similarly, the aesthetic, again, we've worked very hard. We've been in front of you talking about that vertical articulation, the setbacks, that articulation of the second and third floor, the middle plane to recess the ground and the upper levels, softening that ground plane with a lot of landscape and making that a very pleasant place. And again, coming back to that celebrating sustainability. And your code currently has basically an understanding for an additional height granted for solar structures. And so what you'll see is one of the variances asking for a little more footage on that to give us a little more height to play with, given the scale that we're looking at in order to get the correct solar angle.
When it comes to the materials, we're looking at cost, maintenance, embodied carbon, VOCs, its ability to be recycled. And so, again, we'll be bringing all these things in front of you, weighing different options, getting your feedback. But it's going to be important that we're evaluating these on all these important criteria.
And one thing I could just say to sort of summarize why that's important for this PD application is that every single design decision, how the building looks, how many, how big the building is, all those details about entrances on the ground floor, site layout, all of that stuff can then be used to talk about why this project makes sense in the neighborhood context, right? Why is this project, why does it make sense in this location? What are those elements that our team has helped identify as important to bring that neighborhood feel and scale and that authentically Aspen experience? So that's essentially capturing all of these decisions that you've been making and then saying, okay, now we're saying that we're meeting the neighborhood context and with the site.
So this is my part. You're aware that half the parking is underground, half the parking is surface. One of the things I want to point out here is if you look at those long banks of surface parking, the code requires us to have a certain number of parking spaces and then like a tree planting area and then a certain number of parking spaces. In order to meet the parking, we don't have the ability to meet that particular section of the code. So that's the variation from the code that we're pointing out here. But we make up for that in other areas. You have large areas of open site area. You have other amenities. You have tree-lined streets. You have tree gardens. You have stormwater systems that are enhanced overall site amenities that sort of make up for the fact that you don't have those tree planters breaking up those banks of parking spaces.
One really important thing along the area right in front of Building 3, all that covered parking there, Giles and I were chatting about this before the meeting, part of the logic of keeping that solid there, it's more of a sound block. If we broke that up and had openings in it, that sound would come right through and really dissipate the effectiveness of that barrier.
And the intent of that is generally designed around large parking lots, when you've got a big field of parking and you're trying to break it up. And so we could have done that, but we didn't. And so that's part of that approach of making it more street-like and less lot-like. I never should use the clicker. Sorry.
Transportation impact analysis report. So, you know, we talked about some of the key findings already and the impacts. In terms of mitigating, you know, the impact analysis report does have some different transit routes proposed. You know, without thinking it through thoroughly, I think in my mind I always thought like a dedicated shuttle from Ruby Park to the Lumberyard would make the most sense. But in the report, they do have different alternatives. And one of them is the expansion of the Burlingame route. And adding 2 buses to the Burlingame route would allow you to go ahead and have more frequency, right? So overall ridership time, the overall time spent would actually decrease because there's less time spent waiting for the next one. And so again, the staff is still evaluating which of those routes we want to recommend. So, you know, we're gonna get together and include the recommended route, but it doesn't. There's no getting around it. We're gonna have to buy 2 buses more than likely. That's going to be some $2+ million for those new electric buses. There's going to be some $1.5 million around each year in operating cost for either the new route or expanded route. And so there are definitely some pros and cons to weigh. Sarah's probably going to weigh in on, you know, how much of that the project should fund up front, how much of the ongoing operating costs are covered through different means. And so we have to get into all of that stuff. But right now, you know, we're talking about the bike share station at a minimum, one of these dedicated transit routes. You know, we've talked about sort of the ineffectiveness of the car share, but at most, transportation's recommending moving the ABC car share over to here, if at all. So our application will put our final recommendations into the application, but that's where we're at, is sort of balancing exactly what those are going to look like. But for the most part, you kind of know what those cost impacts are going to be.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, I understand there'll be costs serving this one way or the other, but I really would love to see us looking at integrating with an airport business center route, and that might be from our side, less than your side. But, you know, when you think about the overall goal of taking traffic off the road, there's a lot of capture that could be had with a dedicated route that also served the AABC somewhat, you know, and we're just so far, and it's nobody's fault here at this table or anything, but we're kind of piecemeal that we only took the first route to Burlingame, and then now we're thinking of a second route that just goes to this project, and yet there's an awful lot of housing units and Annie Mitchell and all these others that are out there, North 40, the free markets, that, you know, and I think that at a certain level, by integrating a larger community than just our housing project, there are other parties who would be contributing to the ongoing operating costs, and that it serves more than just our housing project. So I'd love to see that look taken to that. It might not work out. It might. Thank you.
Okay, so now Nicole's going to get into like a lot more specifics about, you know, the application, the dimensional standards and all that.
Right.
She's gonna
The
try.
moment, I'll try to be fast, yeah. The moment you all have been waiting for, talking about code. So when considering the potential underlying zoning district designations, we first acknowledged that in order to maximize the site and fit in as many needs as we needed to, this would have to be a planned development. And as a planned development, the underlying zoning designation becomes the framework for which the city considers the proposed project design, but it doesn't necessarily prescribe all of the dimensional standards and requirements. And so we knew that we needed to select a district that would align with what the site needs, but also would make sense within the existing neighborhood context. And so the first thing we did was take a look at the existing conditions on the site. And as you know, we're at the northwest edge of city limits. The current zoning that's in place for the site itself is a split between service, commercial, industrial, with a planned development overlay on the mini storage and lumberyard properties. And on the undeveloped triangle parcel, the existing zoning is rural, residential, and conservation. So the zoning districts were applied to these properties in order to memorialize or freeze those existing buildings and uses, and allow them to continue to operate but not expand. And this was done with the express understanding that each of the properties would eventually be rezoned at the time of the application for the project came forward. It's important to just keep in mind that whole history when thinking about the zoning designation. And also, I think a really important concept to know and point out is that the property is located within the urban growth boundary for the city, and that we're also surrounded by existing commercial uses and residential communities that are already developed. So we ultimately landed on a residential multifamily zoning as the proposed underlying district for the project. So this was proposed to community development and is supported by staff. According to code, the purpose of the RMF district is to provide for intensive long-term residential purposes, and lands with the designation are typically found within Aspen's infill areas and are in walking distance for transit routes and existing residential development. So all things that correlate with our project. The uses planned for the lumberyard are also compatible with the RMF zone. The proposed multifamily residences and plans for the future childcare location are already contemplated as uses that are appropriate for the existing language of the code. But perhaps even more compelling is that the lumberyard design aligns with the dimensional requirements prescribed in the RMF zone more closely than with the other existing zoning designations. And so knowing that this project is going to be proposed as a PD, that alignment with the RMF dimensional standards and uses provides a great foundational framework that's necessary for a successful review. So while we're recognizing that variations are going to be requested, the RMF district really gets us and the project as close as we can to fit within the prescribed city standards. So our variation requests. Here you're looking at a table that lists the dimensional standards as stated in the current city code for the RMF district, and a list of the requested variances that are based on our proposed site and building design. And you've already heard about them. While considerable attention was given to the city design standards during the design process, we're going to have to request these variations to efficiently use the site and achieve those design goals. Keep in mind that the dimensional standards and variations that you see are based on the subdivided site and not on the 11 acres as a whole. So when you see variation in the minimum lot width, setbacks, and FAR, we're projecting those measurements taken and using the new street street layout and parcel boundaries, okay? We've already talked about that we're going to continue to coordinate with community development, and we will ultimately land on a set of complete variation requests in our application.
Can I just ask you a question about that? Why RMF rather than just AH?
Well, we've went back and forth on that, right?
More than a little.
And really, I think what it came down to was the alignment with, we were more closely aligned with the dimensional standards for the RMF. So it allowed for, I think, more particularly the density.
In the AH, we would have been asking for variations on the density?
We would have to, on all of them, was my understanding, we would have to ask for a variation on that. But the RMF, that residential multifamily, was the closest we could get.
And also through our initial pre-app meeting, the outcome of that and the letter that we received from Ben, he was recommending that we would follow RF. So we considered that, and we looked at that and evaluated that and talked back and forth.
Community development recommended RMF PD from the start. We went back and forth quite a bit on should it be AHPD, should it be RMF PD. And ultimately, the argument that won out was that under AHPD, we're actually less compliant with the dimensional standards of AH, and we're actually more compliant with the dimensional standards of RMF. But actually, ComDev, Jim agreed it could be AHPD, but since there was that other reasoning that it's just more closely aligned dimensionally, and it's also adjacent to Annie Mitchell is RMF, and so there's just a few more reasons to do RMF PD.
Yeah, no, I mean, that all sounds fine and great. I guess I had a misunderstanding of what the allowable things were under an AHPD situation, and that's all.
Right. The uses are the same. It's the dimensional standard.
You could also fix the AH zone district.
Totally for that too. I just, you say it's a small variations. It's a community where 6 inches can seem like a big variation.
Absolutely.
Future councils want to continue with more density, it may be a good idea to take that up later on to try to make AH more compatible for that.
Right.
So moving on.
Yeah, we're close here.
Learn along the way.
Right, absolutely. So after meeting with community development staff for that pre-application that Randy was talking about, we got a list of applications that we would need to put forward for a concurrent review. And so the application package will include a subdivision review, a rezoning application, review under the growth management quota system, consideration and analysis for the school land dedication and impact fee analysis, and a residential design review. But the two reviews that actually define the process that the Lumberyard application will follow are the major public project and the plan development review. So the remaining slides I'm going to go through very quickly, but they will essentially outline each of those applications and the process that we will expect to see for the Lumberyard. So the purpose of the public project review is to establish an alternative process in order to provide a more flexible and coordinated review within the city. And Aspen Code actually states that affordable housing projects that are developed by the city, like this one, must be considered under the public project review. There's 3 different ways that a public project is reviewed, but the Community Development Department ultimately determined that our project met the major public project review standards. Through this review, we will be using a 2-step review process that will replace the typical 3-step process that you see for a major plan development application. So the 2-step process will include a combined project and detailed review into one submittal. Okay. The public hearing process will begin with in a similar way, right, with a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission for a recommendation, followed by a second public hearing before this council for an ultimate decision by ordinance. And so the general review standards for all public projects will be applicable, and our application will include analysis and findings, a lot of the things that you heard about already, showing that the Lumberyard project is in compliance with the standards. The next application to go over quickly is that the Lumberyard site will require a major subdivision application. The proposed subdivision layout was designed specifically to accommodate a phased building development and infrastructure construction program. So that directly correlated with that, with our subdivision application. 10 parcels, you heard about how they are going to be broken down. The new public streets, we've also gone over. And the application will include information necessary to satisfy the applicable review standards under this code. We're confident that the proposed subdivision can be approved due to the findings found in the environmental and geological assessments completed during due diligence, along with our concurrent zoning and PD applications, and of course, with the proposed access plan and infrastructure design. So we're confident that this would be a successful application. Next slide. In order to develop the site into affordable housing, a rezoning application will be required. So as explained earlier, we're proposing RMF zoning with that planned development overlay. RMFPD is an intensive residential zoning district. It's a departure from the current zoning that is in place for the site. However, due to the surrounding uses that exist, the location within the urban growth boundary, and the proximity to established infrastructure and access routes, it is consistent with the existing development pattern in the area, and it is an appropriate zoning district for this application. So when considering the appropriateness of RMFPD at a city level, the request definitely aligns with long-range city plans. You know that we're ultimately providing over 200 permanently affordable units with the project, and the Aspen Area Community Plan repeatedly calls for the city to prioritize the creation of affordable housing, and the RMFPD zone is needed to actualize that goal. Slide. So our plan development. The plan development process provides a way to create a site-specific development plan, while at the same time ensuring that the plan will align with community goals and vision. So you know that we need to meet as many needs as possible, and we have a lot of site-specific constraints. Variation from city standards will be required. The variations will maximize the efficient use of the site, provide for an ideal number of affordable units, and result in a site and building design that exceeds that which would have been possible if we had to adhere strictly to the code. So the process and review criteria related to the PD will be incorporated into the public project process. So here, a typical PD review begins with project review and is followed by a detailed review. But in this case, our team will address the criteria and requirements for both project and detailed review in one combined submittal. So ultimately, at the conclusion of the city review, a PD agreement and plat will ultimately establish and memorialize the new development rights and dimensional standards associated with the proposed project. Really quick, just wanting to hit on some high-level things here. We're confident that the project as designed can satisfy both sets of review criteria that are associated with a detailed review and project review. You've already heard that the project aligns with city goals. It's compatible with neighborhood character. It generally complies with the RMF underlying zoning district. And the site itself is favorable location for a project because of its proximity to existing facilities and to physical geological characteristics. When considering the site plan, the application will emphasize the prioritization of safety and resiliency, the improved vehicular and pedestrian access and circulation, and the innovative stormwater design and connection to city utilities. Zooming in when considering the buildings themselves, our PD application will capture the emphasis placed on sustainability, the use of active and passive solar design, the living well elements like elevator access, storage, and flexible unit design. And it's also will highlight the efforts to create an authentically Aspen community, one that celebrates Deer Hill through the use of natural materials and private and common open space and affordability. So finally, our growth management quota system and school land dedication and impact fees. So as a 100% affordable housing project that meets Aspen Pitkin County Housing Authority guidelines, the Lumberyard project does qualify for an administrative review under the growth management quota system. You know that there are no annual limits on affordable housing allotments, that we would have trigger no mitigation requirements, and the application will include information to support the claim that the project meets the administrative review standards and is not subject to any mitigation. The development of the Lumberyard will result in a net increase in the residential floor area for the city, which triggers an in-kind contribution for payment for school land dedication, TDM, and air quality impact fees. The application will include a request for an exemption from these dedication requirements and fees in accordance with Section 26-610-100, which allows the city to waive fees when a development includes affordable housing or is an essential public facility.
I appreciate this complexity and what you've been able to pull together for us. My only comment is, as a councilwoman, I do not want to waive the school dedication fees. It's likely this is going to increase some enrollment. We're already helping the schools out with sales tax that we dedicate towards them, and it would just seem silly to do this, to not. And so I do think that in terms of transportation, the way, which I think the TDM is, we're already planning on elements that satisfy those sort of needs, and we should emphasize that, whether it's the bus routes or whatever in this application. It's not like we're walking away from transportation demand management issues there. But that's just me, but I really do think that this is something that we should contribute to the school system. Thank you.
In the past, the code didn't really allow us that exemption, but it does now, so that's why we brought it up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, but I appreciate our schools.
Yeah. How's that? That was just a whole lot of information and like.
Oh, we're going to wrap it in 2 minutes.
We're going to wrap it,
Yeah.
So residential design standards is another piece that we have to step through, and we think that we will be able to demonstrate a strong alignment with the residential design standards, specifically along building orientation. Again, we really are putting that front to the site, so we've got our majority of front facades are parallel with the new streets that we've created. Additionally, garage access, locating those toward the rear of the site, and really minimizing those to have only one garage access point per building. And again, that relates to placement as well. Entry connection, we talked a lot about this. That is a big piece of that alignment with residential design standards. So having that ability to access your unit from the sidewalk is important. And we talked as well about principal windows. This standard is applicable. And our units do contain several windows. We meet or exceed the window standard, but again, we're really optimizing and providing that Goldilocks version of window sizing. Also providing several areas as a design feature in the common areas, the large expanses of glass to really kind of help dematerialize the corners of the building, provide those views through, as well as giving those common spaces that experience of connecting to the outside.
So do the contents of the application,
Fun. Look at that.
as described, meet your expectations? Can we formally submit the application and kick off the formal land use review and approval process? Can we go ahead and perform the community outreach related to that as we described?
Bless you. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Oh, boy, everybody's losing it.
I know.
All right. Rachel, I'm going to start with you down there.
Okay.
Couple of key questions and any comments you want to offer.
Thank you. Yes, it meets my expectations, and yes, I'm ready to prepare to see it submitted, and I didn't catch Chris's third question.
The public outreach part.
Yeah, I think it's worth proceeding and trying to explain as best as possible. The only comment I would make is just more for your future presentations or anything, but my impression of residential design standards came into play when we felt these single-family homes throughout the West End and all the other lots were not friendly and not appropriate, and parking garage doors facing the street and things like that. They weren't really designed around large multifamily buildings. And so it just may be valuable to remind people of that we didn't do multifamily residential design standards. We were thinking of the classic grid neighborhoods that we have in the West End. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Yes to all three questions.
Thanks, John.
Good work, thanks.
Thank you.
Skippy.
Yes, and yes, and with respect to the outreach, just clearly from the informing place of this is how we got to now, and we're moving forward. And to make sure that on that outreach list is the county and county commissioners as well.
No to the first one. I think you exceed our expectations.
What a bait and switch. My God. My God. At 4 hours and 5 minutes, he hits us with it.
Can you go over that again, please? Yes to submit, and the more public outreach, the better. We're still not going to have enough of it, so.
Is that always true?
Same here. I'm supportive of getting it ready for formal application. I really look forward to this last round of community outreach. I really do. I think what's going to return is kind of support and clarification of kind of what we've done here. You know, we all have made compromises in pursuit of the best project for our community. And I think that we've come up with that. You know, when I look at this, there's items that, you know, are a lot for me, a stretch for me and my own values. But again, I've heard the feedback from my community, and I believe that we're returning a project that really checks a lot of boxes. You guys deserve a lot of credit for working on the timeline that you have with the input that we've given you, which has been a lot. It has grown, it has changed over time. We've all learned a lot about what we can do and can accomplish. And this project, I think, if it goes forward, even in its current iteration, is going to be a great benefit to this community. And when I say this community, I don't just mean Aspen proper, but really for our entire valley as we move forward regionally in our pursuit of some of the solutions. I do have some minor input. I think a lot of attention needs to be put towards the transit plan and planning. We have an opportunity to integrate, and I really appreciate Rachel saying to the AABC, but future airport development and looking at this entire corridor with a lot of room for improvement and opportunity. And I really hope that we can do some bold solution seeking in order to get some of those transit solutions on the table for this. That's truly going to be one of the big impacts that people are going to notice. And we can do everything in our power to make that as comfortable for our community as possible.
Yeah.
You listed challenges when we started. I think maybe slide 1 or 2 had challenges, and we're greatly aware of those, whether it's density versus open space, access to daylight, noise mitigation, the transit, heights, especially with the mechanical to get the solar on top. These are all going to be things that our community are going to ask questions about. But again, I think that we've really tried to balance all the input that we've gotten and come up with a great project here. So many thanks to you, Chris. Thank you for your long hours of work on this.
Yeah.
Long years.
Yeah, isn't that true?
Tons of input from you. Thank you so much.
Mr. Mayor,
Jim?
I want to remind you that once an application is submitted, you may be changing your hats. You wear one hat as an owner, you wear a different hat as a reviewer. So as soon as the application is submitted, you will be theoretically changing those hats. Now, we'll acknowledge that there's circumstances in which you could come back and be asked to put on the other hat and consider changes in such as the owner. But I just want to remind you that once the application is submitted, that it's going through a review process and you will be wearing the hat as a reviewer.
And so are you saying that as it goes in the review process, it becomes a quasi-judicial matter that we will eventually be discussing, and we should not be having conversations about it among ourselves or with other members of the community, just urging them to make public comments so that we can consider their thoughts at the right time?
Very well put.
Thank you.
I will say again that there's circumstances when changes to the application could be requested and you do go back to that ownership position. But I think that is as well as you can say.
And it would then also be okay for us in that quasi-judicial role, once we're there, to ask questions of our staff as a professional back and forth to the staff, but again, not broader discussions among ourselves.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Came a long way to serve their purpose.
Thanks for all the collaboration, and thanks for just the great leadership.
When do we
It's been
see
our
you
pleasure.
again?
We got to figure that out. We're
Okay.
Well, I
putting
was
some,
going to say, hopefully public engagement.
yeah,
Hope so.
yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, totally. Yeah, what are we supposed to wear anything?
You know, prudence would say yes, do that.
White tie and tails? What are we talking about?
Only you have a white tuxedo.
I do have a white tuxedo, that's true. I don't have white.